I'd like to welcome everyone. My name is Rebecca Lowe. I'm the Adult Program Coordinator at the Lewis Public Library, and thank you for joining us this evening, and welcome to our spring series, Science and Society, Making Sense of the World Around Us. This lecture series is co-organized and co-moderated by Fred Dilla, Executive Director Emeritus of the American Institute of Physics and author of Scientific Journeys, Linda Dilla, former Public Information Officer at the Jefferson Laboratory and the U.S. Department of Energy, and Colin Norman, the former news editor at Science. And with that, I am going to turn this over to Colin. So thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you to the wonderful Lewis Public Library for making these talks possible, and all the other terrific events that the library puts together. So, welcome everybody to the spring series of our Science and Society talks. This, surprisingly, will be our 6th year of doing these talks. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce my good friend Tim Appenzeller for what has become an annual talk to kick off our series. This is the third time Tim has described Science Magazine's picks for the leading scientific developments of the past year. Tim is in a perfect vantage point to survey the cutting-edge science around the world. Of course, he's employed by one of the leading science publications in the world, so he gets an eye on the publications sometimes before they're even published. And Tim directs a team of science writers and editors literally around the world. They're all covering developments in research and developments in the international scientific community and politics and fun things like that. For both the weekly magazine and the daily online news service. And if you're not familiar with it, I highly recommend taking a look at Science's website and their daily news service. In addition to Science, where Tim and I worked together in the 1990s, Tim has worked at most of the key scientific publications, including National Geographic, Scientific American, and Nature, where he directed their reporting operations from London. This will be just a slightly different format from our usual because Tim's going to be covering a whole range of topics. Fred Dilla or I may chime in from time to time with questions while those topics are still fresh. So it'll be a little bit more of a chat than usual. But there will be time for questions at the end. So please put them in the chat and Fred or I will relay them to Tim. So Tim, tell us about the hot science of 2025.
Well, thanks so much, Colin, and thank you all for tuning in. It's a pleasure to be talking to you, some of you again. Let me share my screen. So, well, I thought I would start with this kind of mysterious and beautiful image, and I'm not going to tell you what it is, only that it's connected to our breakthrough, but I will, at my big reveal at the end, I will explain it, and this may be an incentive to keep you all listening through my talk. So as Colin mentioned, I work at Science, which is a journal of science. It publishes papers on cutting edge research, some of the best papers around, but it also has a news operation. And we have a kind of annual ritual late in the year when the news staff and the technical editors, the people who handle the papers, get together and survey the year's science and try to pick out the 10 things that really stand out. They may be discoveries, really fresh science. They may be ways in which science is influencing society that have really become apparent over the past year. I'm showing our past 4 breakthroughs. They were always published in the last issue of the year and on the cover. 2021 was a real discovery. It was an artificial intelligence technique for predicting the form and function of proteins just based on their chemical sequence, which is hugely important for understanding basic biology and also drug development. The next year, we celebrated a wonderful new telescope that some of you have heard about in these lectures, the James Webb Telescope, which is sitting 1 million miles from Earth and peering back into the very early days of the universe. 2023 was a celebration of the GLP-1 drugs that are transforming the treatment of obesity. And 2024 was about a new HIV medicine that acts as a prophylactic. One shot can pretty much prevent infection, with almost complete reliability for 6 months or even a year. It's really the next best thing to a vaccine for HIV, which people have been seeking for decades and have not managed to create. So I am going to go through our 9 runners-up and culminate with our breakthrough. And I'm going to present the runners-up not in order of importance or breakthroughness, but just in a way that I thought paced the talk well. So this is a story about a kind of disturbing partnership. You might think of the normal tissues that cancer spreads through as just kind of passive, a landscape through which it grows. But doctors have known for a long time that cancers have a special relationship with nerves. If you cut the nerves that lead to a tumor, it will often grow more slowly, and it will become sort of feeble. Its metabolism will slow down. This was kind of a mystery, but last year, lab studies showed what's happening. So what they saw was nerve cells, that's blue in this image, transferring tiny organelles. These are little compartments within cells that have specialized functions to the cancer cells. Those are red. And the organelles that were being transferred over these microscopic bridges between the cells are mitochondria. These are the cell's power plants. There are thousands of them in every cell, and they convert food, basically glucose, into the chemical energy that cells run on. Now, cancer cells need a lot of energy because they're growing like mad and spreading. So this transfer and the mitochondria, this is one. The mitochondria are green. You can see one that has made the jump to a cancer cell. They supercharge the cancers. The researchers showed in the lab that if you add mitochondria to cancer cells that are deficient in them, they'll grow faster. They showed that metastases are more likely to have these mitochondria. And they don't understand why this happens. How is it that the cancers basically seduce the nerve cells into giving up their power plants? But they do, and this could be a clue to future treatments that might slow the spread of cancer by blocking this transfer.
Tim, I want to comment on this extraordinary micrograph. Probably many in the audience remember being in high school biology and looking through a microscope at cells. Usually it was an onion root tip because they were very big. And it was kind of dull. I mean, everything was sort of grayish. And this remarkable micrograph shows the difference between a cancer cell and a normal cell and the little mitochondria, all very differentiated because of bright colors. And it just shows you how amazing modern microscopic techniques are now that can label very specific parts of a cell and follow what happens. So I stared at this picture for probably 5 or 10 minutes thinking about how remarkable modern biology is now because of the improvement of microscopes.
Yeah. And this kind of image sort of captures what's happening, red-handed, so to speak. So, earlier I talked about the Webb telescope. which was our breakthrough a few years ago. Well, now astronomers have another amazing instrument. This one is called the Vera Rubin telescope, the Vera Rubin Observatory. It's not in space, it's on the ground in Chile. And it's not the biggest telescope ever. Its main mirror is a little over 8 meters across. That is barely a fifth the size of a giant telescope that's rising on another hill in Chile being built by the Europeans. But this has some unique features. It has a huge field of view. It can look at an area of sky in sort of one glance that's as wide as about 40 full moons. It has an enormous camera, 3,200 megapixels. You wouldn't put that around your neck. It's about the size of a car. And it is designed to scan the entire sky every 3 days. Basically taking a complete picture of the night sky and then doing it over 3 days later. In the course of a year, it will collect more data than all the other telescopes in history combined. And because it returns to the same spot in the sky every 3 days, it is going to spot everything that's changed in those 3 days. Supernovae that have exploded, asteroids that have moved across the field of view, maybe even undiscovered planets. There's this thought that there's a planet 9 out there beyond Uranus. It's going to create this huge torrent of data with all sorts of subtle differences. And it's far more than human astronomers could pick through. So they've designed this data pipeline that will use all kinds of techniques, including artificial intelligence, to pick out all these events, all these ways in which the sky has changed, and deliver the ones that seem significant to astronomers for follow-up. The image on the right is a sort of first light image of something called the Trifid Nebula. It just shows that the telescope is working really, really well. It will begin its scans this year. In the course of looking at the night sky over and over and over again, it's going to build up this extremely detailed map of the universe out to huge distances. And features of the map will let astronomers explore some of the things that you can't see. In particular, dark energy, which is this really mysterious property, maybe a property of space anyway, that is causing the expansion of the universe to accelerate. And dark matter, which is some kind of mass that holds galaxies and galaxy clusters together and was played a big role in forming all the structures we see now. And it may deliver some clues to what these things are. And I should say that Vera Rubin was an American astronomer from Washington, D.C., actually, who really found the first good evidence for dark matter in the 1970s, studying the way galaxies spin around.
Tim, you're making it very hard to add anything else since you've described this wonderful telescope so well. But I think one thing I could add is there have been lots of discussions about whether artificial intelligence will do anything for science. And we may come back to that with one of your other breakthroughs. Here's a perfect example when this telescope produces as much data in a couple hours as all the astronomical data that's ever been produced. And they're looking for changes, which is, of course, what an astronomer would like to see since ancient times. What's changed? Has a star been born? Is there a new comet? And there's going to be something like 1 million changes in that part of the sky in one 10-hour period. Well, there's no way an army of graduate students are going to stare at that data and come up with which ones are you going to study. So farming these data out to many advanced computer systems with artificial intelligence will help, say, tell an astronomer, let's look at this particular event that happened at this particular time.
Yeah.
It's an example of a telescope that is useful because of the power of modern computers and the use of artificial intelligence.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It wouldn't work without them. So this is not out into space. This is back in time. Um, and more than 50,000 years ago, we humans really weren't alone on this earth as we are now. There were two other kinds of humans um, who we sort of shared territory with in Europe and Asia. One was the Neanderthals, which everyone's heard about, although the Neanderthals are still mysterious. We don't know how like us they were. But another was discovered about 15 years ago from DNA in a tiny bit of bone from a cave in Siberia. Couldn't tell what this creature looked like, but it was clear it was different from Neanderthals and humans. Very like us in its DNA sequence, but with enough differences to be probably a different species. And since then, lots of other bits of bone and tooth have turned out to contain DNA from this kind of human called the Denisovans. Um, but we had no idea what they looked like. Uh, People had wondered about a skull in China called Dragon Man that had been found decades ago and was odd looking, but was sort of sitting on a shelf. Um, and last year, scientists managed to get DNA from this skull. It didn't come from the bone itself. Strangely, it came from a bit of dental calculus. Um, Calculus got lots of stuff in it, minerals, bacteria. It also captures DNA from saliva and turns out to be a very good kind of vault or repository for this DNA. And they got it out, and lo and behold, this is the face of a Denisovan. Very heavy brow ridge, big jaws. So we know what our long ago companion looked like. And in fact, Denisovans live on like Neanderthals in the DNA of many of us because they mated with some of our ancestors way back before they disappeared 50,000 years ago or so.
So a great achievement to get DNA from a bit of a bit of a tooth like that. I was just going to point out that coincidentally today a similar kind of discovery was announced, which was a very early possible human ancestor called Homo habilis. That we've known about only from a jawbone and a tooth, I believe. Um, they have now found a Homo habilis specimen that they announced today, which tells us a lot more about the structure of this potential early human. Turns out it's quite a bit different from you and I.
Yeah, may not be the direct ancestor of us that have been thought. So still a lot of mysteries.
Well, this guy doesn't look like my ancestor, that's for sure.
Well, things change over time. So this one it's a bit of an anti-breakthrough in a way. This is a story of an exciting possibility that went away last year, but the way that happened is really interesting and marks an advance in science. So for decades, Fred may correct me there. Anyway, for many years, physicists were sort of tantalized by hints that a particle called a muon. It's basically a heavy relative of the electron. It's also got a charge, but it's short-lived. The muon is just a little bit more magnetic than the best calculations said it should be. Now, both the measurements and the calculations are really, really hard. So to measure the magnetism of this particle, physicists would make beams of it and then whirl them around this ring at high speeds and measure how the muons spin in a magnetic field, which gives an indication of how magnetic the muons themselves are. It's a very hard measurement to make, and they kept refining it. And then the calculation had to do with basically predicting the effect of virtual particles. Now, quantum mechanics, now you can really correct me, Fred. It says that basically no point in space is really empty. Particles are constantly kind of winking into existence and out of existence. They're ghostly particles, they're not real, but they can have an effect. And their magnetism can affect the magnetism of real particles. And their total effect was just a little less, their total calculated effect was just a little less than the actual measured magnetism of this particle. So the measurements kept getting better, calculations kept getting better. And this gap, this anomaly was still there, and this really excited physicists because it suggested that somewhere there in this sea of virtual particles were particles that they have not discovered, that they don't know about, and that could be discovered at giant atom smashers. And physicists have been really desperate for something new. Their current understanding of particles and forces is complete and has been proven over and over again, and it's getting a little bit frustrating. They want to discover something new, and this seemed to be a clue that there might be something out there still to find. Well, this year, or rather last year, theorists tried a new way of calculating the magnetism, the predicted magnetism of the muon. And the gap went away. The new calculation agrees pretty closely with what has been measured. So in a way, this is a disappointment. A clue to new physics has gone away. But on the other hand, the success of this new way of calculating the effect of these virtual particles is a triumph, and another indication that physicists grasp on particles and forces is pretty firm.
Well, Tim, you've again done a wonderful explanation, and you claim you don't understand physics. This is a long story, as you've mentioned. It's actually been going on for 3 decades. Again, I'll remind people in the audience what they learned about the inside of an atom when they were a kid. There was an electron going around the nucleus, which is a proton and a neutron. Well, in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, when I was studying physics, they had machines like what you saw in the photo here, going up to the giant accelerators, both at Fermilab and at CERN, that started seeing that the world was made of lots of strange new particles, the muon being one of them, an electron that had a charge like the electron, but it was 200 times heavier, and it didn't last long. It was actually discovered in 1936 in cosmic rays, but not really understood. And this whole zoology of particles smaller than an atom was a mess in the 60s and 70s. It was actually called the atomic zoo. And physicists were looking at some way to how do you put some order to this. Order eventually came when what was now called the Standard Model was produced that described how these particles had been produced and their characteristics, and it looked like we now understood how the world was put together at the sub-nuclear level. And then occasionally there'd be a measurement that didn't agree with the Standard Model. And as you said, Tim, that got physicists excited. So maybe there's something better than the Standard Model. And this measurement that was started at Brookhaven National Lab in Long Island and finished up at Fermilab outside of Chicago showed a few parts per billion difference between the calculation and the measurement. And those of you listening would probably say, a few parts per billion, who cares? Okay? Well, if you're trying to decide that you have the theory of the universe, you want to get it correct. And just last year, the measurements agreed with the standard model, and any hope that the standard model was wrong is fading away. And again, I'll come back to the question, why would anyone else care? Well, learning and understanding how the universe was put together at the very fundamental level has allowed us to do all sorts of things, like manipulate electrons that are now transmitting our voice and our pictures. So understanding this at the very fundamental levels is important, even though worrying about whether a muon hangs around for this amount of time or that amount of time doesn't. So it was a crack in physics, but it vanished, and it made half the community very happy and the other half disappointed.
Well, here is hoping for more cracks in physics next year. But here's a very different kind of advance. So rice, it's the staple crop for more than half the world. And the world is warming, and rice doesn't do very well in the heat. Uh, Hot weather, especially hot nights, which have been becoming more and more common, affects the quality of the grain, causes the starch to clump together, makes the grain sort of chalky, and it also cuts yields. One study showed that, at least for a particular variety of rice, just 1 degree of nighttime warming can cut harvests by 10%. So that's a real threat to world food security. Well, last year, scientists in China found what could be a natural fix. It's a gene variant that seems to protect certain strains of rice from the heat. It wasn't easy to find. They grew something like 500 different strains of rice, and took the ones that seemed to do best in the heat, crossbred them, trying to home in on the gene or genes that was responsible for this kind of resilience. And they eventually found one gene. When they transferred it to heat-sensitive varieties of rice, it made them heat-resistant. So this is quite a big deal, and it has a bunch of seed companies in China and elsewhere quite excited. They are beginning to equip commercial strains of rice with this gene. It's also set off a hunt for similar protective genes in other staple crops, including corn and wheat. So this is hope for adapting to a warming world.
Yeah, it sounds like a really important development for a lot of people. Um, as I understand it, much of this research was done by kind of old-fashioned crossbreeding, and
Yeah.
you might be able to put this particular gene into new strains of rice again simply by crossbreeding and not genetic modification, which might perhaps help in the acceptance of these strains of rice.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the world is still quite resistant to genetically modified crops, including, I think, China. I think China is only
Yeah.
very gradually beginning to allow them.
Yeah.
So this is again about a tool, not a discovery. And it's about something that is shaking up science in many fields, and no surprise, it's AI. So scientists have been using AI for a long time. Machine learning algorithms that can recognize patterns in huge data sets, like what we were talking about with the Rubin telescope, specialized algorithms that can perform particular tasks, like the protein folding AIs that were our breakthrough a few years back. But last year, what was new is large language models, basically the same things that power chatbots like ChatGPT, and write those annoying summaries at the top of your Google search page and help millions of kids with their homework. They started to do science and math at a pretty high level. One relative of Gemini won the top high school math contest. An LLM and AI from Meta figured out the best way to run a complex chemical reaction. Other AIs, other chatbots have identified drug candidates that look promising. There was even a scientific conference at which all 48 studies were done, at least partly, by AIs. So this is all impressive. The thing is, not all those 48 studies were great, and many scientists are not yet ready to kind of accept AI as an equal partner in doing science. This kind of AI, these generative AIs. For one thing, hallucinations are still a problem. Um, the other concern is that AIs are not truly innovative, that they are very good at solving familiar kinds of problems in familiar ways, but not at solving the kinds of problems that really push science forward. Uh, so this is a work in progress. AIs are getting better every day, and their shortcomings at one point may not be their shortcomings in the future. So we'll see, but they are definitely making incursions, and many people are both excited and apprehensive about the arrival of the chatbots in science.
I think that's a key point, the apprehension, but it's driven by probably some language that is over the top, saying you're going to put scientists and engineers out of business. But almost every one of our new inventions had that dichotomy of what is it going to do to this, or what is it going to do to that. I think most scientists who've been exposed to it see it as a very valuable new tool. I mean, particularly for the Rubin telescope. There's no way that one small group of people can analyze that much data. Or for the drug development ideas that you talked about. So you can run a vastly number of new calculations with data sets that can't be handled by hand manually. So this will generate new discoveries and new inventions. So in the end, it will be a new tool of science that will be very valuable, particularly for very data-driven sciences, which most science is these days.
Yeah. I might mention that next week there'll be a very interesting study coming out that I think many of you will read about in newspapers about the impact of AI on science, on the productivity of science, on the way scientific studies build on each other. And it shows both good and bad. So watch News from Science website. We'll be writing about it. So this is another medical one, and this is a battle that you would think we're not fighting anymore. These are the bacteria that cause gonorrhea. They have an odd sort of double-lobed structure. And gonorrhea has traditionally been cured with a dose of antibiotics. The problem is that the bacteria are extremely good at developing resistance to antibiotics, and many antibiotics have been effective and then lost their oomph. And the latest and greatest treatment now is becoming less effective as well. But last year, very positive results were reported for two completely new antibiotics, and they were approved by the FDA at the end of the year. This is important because this is a disease that affects 80 million people a year it's becoming more frequent. And if it's untreated, it has some pretty serious consequences. Another thing that's interesting about this is that antibiotics are not something that drug companies are particularly eager to invest in. Unlike a lot of the blockbuster drugs, you don't take them for a lifetime. You take them for a week or two, and then you're done if you're lucky. So that limits their profitability. So one of these antibiotics was developed through a sort of new model. The initial work was done by Pfizer, then a small biotech took it over, and a nonprofit consortium that is dedicated to funding the development of new antibiotics took it the rest of the way through the clinical trials that show that it works. So hopefully this is a model for future antibiotics, not just for gonorrhea. But in the meantime, doctors have these two new tools, and there's a lot of debate going on now about how to use them so that they'll remain effective for as long as possible. And the development of resistance will be delayed.
So yeah, another really good and interesting development, which you explained very well, Tim. As I understand it, these two new antibiotics target enzymes that are common to many bacteria. So I suspect there's some hope that they could be much more widely used than just gonorrhea. But
yeah, I would imagine so. I mean, antibiotic resistance is a problem in many diseases, and the hunt for people are eager for new ones.
And drug companies are looking for some way to fund that work because, as you say, they aren't used for very long, and they don't get a large return on the investment. So this new model, I think, is as important as the first development from the new model.
Yeah, that's right. So we're staying in medicine for a little while. This is a pig kidney, and it's about to be transplanted into a human patient. Now you might wonder why you would do that. Well, it's shortage. Organ transplants are life-saving, but the waiting lists are very long. There were 90,000 people on the waiting list in the U.S. for a kidney last year, 3,500 for a heart. And for decades, researchers have thought, well, the answer might be to transplant animal organs. And there have been a number of attempts, often, much hyped, but they've generally ended in failure. You might remember, for instance, baby Faye, who got a baboon heart and lived 10 days. It was in a sort of blaze of attention. I think it was in the 1980s. The problem is that the human body is very good at rejecting foreign tissue and reacts really ferociously to animal tissue. There's also the fear that an organ transplant for an animal could transfer viruses that affect animals into the human population. That's also been a worry that slowed this field. But genetic technologies finally seem to be making some headway against these problems. Companies are developing pigs, lots of pigs with many gene modifications, including pig genes that have been knocked out to make their tissues less likely to be rejected by the human body. Some of the companies are adding human genes to improve the compatibility. They're knocking out viruses, so-called endogenous viruses that are kind of incorporated in the DNA of the pigs. And they're even modifying growth genes, pig growth genes, so that their organs don't sort of outgrow the human recipient. And last year, it looked like these efforts were starting to pay off. One man in Massachusetts got a pig kidney that had more than 60 genetic modifications, and he lived for 9 months before it failed. There was a similar success in China. And the FDA, sort of taking this whole thing seriously, finally approved a clinical trial with pig kidneys. So they're going to be tested like a drug, And I'm not quite sure how the trial will work, but this could lead to pig kidney transplantation at least becoming routine. Of course, there are also efforts to transplant pig hearts. They haven't worked as well. But finally, last year, this effort called xenotransplantation, is looking like more than a pipe dream, and may well ultimately be the answer to the organ shortage.
Yeah, again, a really interesting development. And there's some research going on, as I understand it, too, trying to not just with a xenotransplant with an organ, but to try and also transplant the thymus to might stop the rejection of the organs. So a lot of really, really interesting research going on in this area.
Yeah, yeah, and starting to pay off.
Mm-hmm.
Now here is a baby who also received a genetic treatment, but this was just a single letter change in his DNA. His name is KJ Muldoon. Um, and his gene was edited. Now, this isn't new. There have been some pretty high profile gene editing treatments recently, but those have been developed for groups of patients. Baby KJ suffers from a unique genetic disease. He has a defect in an enzyme that turns uh, ammonia in the blood into urea. Now, ammonia is a breakdown product of the proteins we eat, and if it builds up, it can cause brain damage. Urea is the form in which we excrete it, and the enzyme acts in the liver to make that conversion. Only about one baby in a million is born with this kind of deficiency, and each one is the product of a unique mutation that maybe no other child has, a unique mutation in the gene for this enzyme. So there's no one size fits all genetic treatment for these kids. So doctors basically tailor-made a gene editor for this baby. And it worked. It reduced the amount of ammonia in his blood, reduced the amount of medicine he had to take. He is apparently doing well. And this is a proof of principle for custom gene editing. The platform that they developed that could be adapted to many other unique genetic diseases. And, even though each one affects only one baby, in total thousands could be helped, providing it turns out that this kind of treatment is safe and providing it can be done at some kind of reasonable cost.
Fantastic development, and should point out that this whole treatment was perfected and delivered in 6 months.
Yeah.
This baby was 6 months old when he was treated. So just an amazing achievement. And as you point out, very, very expensive.
Yeah, yeah. So our breakthrough, there's our cover, and it is the really incredible rise of renewable energy around the world. Of course, wind and solar, which is what this really focuses on, aren't new. Um, but last year, they passed a couple of thresholds that really make it clear that this is here to stay, that it's only going to continue, that it's going to change the global energy picture, and that it ultimately will make a difference to the climate. So for the first time, renewable energy, but it's not just wind and solar, but also hydroelectric, produced more electricity worldwide than coal. If you're like me, when you hear electric utility, you probably think of smokestacks and heaps of coal. Well, no more. It's just as likely to look like what you see on the left there, which is a lake in China, a reservoir covered with solar panels. The other big threshold that was crossed is that wind and solar alone grew by enough to cover all the new electricity demand around the world. So, and you can imagine the electricity use is going up very, very fast, especially in the global south, and China and India. And renewables, wind and solar, were enough to cover it all. It's not just China, though China's doing it on a huge scale. It is poorer countries in Africa and Asia. Those are a couple of small rooftop solar panels in a poor part of Nairobi. And here are what the trends look like. So you can see this astonishing growth of solar, the very fast growth of wind. I should point out that this graph kind of exaggerates the position of solar as an energy source. So this represents global capacity. Basically, it's how much power all the solar panels in the world could produce if they were all being hit by full sun at the same time. And that, of course, isn't realistic. It's an unfair comparison to coal because coal plants can run all the time at full power. But you can get a sense of the speed of growth. And the graph on the right shows the consequences. So it is a graph of the annual emissions of carbon dioxide, and they have been growing steadily, really, since the beginning of the century and pretty rapidly since the 1950s. Along the way, different countries have reached peaks. Their emissions have stopped growing. So France in 1973 started building nuclear reactors. Germany, Russia when it collapsed, the US as it began moving away from coal. But what is hopeful is that global emissions are starting to plateau. That means that the annual emissions are no longer, or will soon no longer, be growing. And that's due to this rise of renewables. And that is hopeful. It's not great because it means we're putting the same amount of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere every year, and the total amount is just gonna keep accumulating. But it's a first step towards what has to happen next, which is that emissions have to be driven down. And if renewables keep rising like crazy, that will happen. Perhaps not fast enough to avoid the worst consequences of climate change, but ultimately it will happen. And China is really driving this. Decades ago, the government decided that for a bunch of reasons, including energy security, the need to reduce the pollution that was choking Chinese cities, and the desire to build a new industrial sector, they were going to go all in on wind and solar. And so they subsidized the industry tremendously, and they installed wind farms and wind turbines and solar panels on just a huge scale. And in fact, it's growing fast enough that it's flattened China's coal use. China uses huge amounts of coal, but it's not using any more. It's not growing. China's making these things in vast quantities and very cheaply, and it's exporting them. Wind turbines, the batteries, the electric cars. China makes 80% of the world's solar panels, 70% of its lithium batteries, 70% of its wind turbines. And it's driven prices down so far that wind and solar are the cheapest forms of energy, of new energy anyway, in most of the world. And they're affordable for all sorts of places that never could before throughout the global south. We were lucky that we had an incredible photographer who documented what this looks like in China. And I'll just take you through some of the pictures because they really bring it home. So this is that reservoir again. I just wanted you to see it full screen. It's actually a fish farm, but they put solar panels over it, and it produces about a tenth as much power as a coal-fired power plant. This is in southern Hunan province Here's another kind of solar power that China is building. This is called concentrated solar. And here the panels aren't producing electricity directly. They're actually mirrors. There are 12,000 of them, and they reflect sunlight on that tower and heat it to incredible temperatures. It's filled with molten salt at 565 degrees Celsius. And the advantage of doing it this way is that the salt holds heat all night. So it can generate electricity, which it does by turning water to steam and driving a turbine. It can generate electricity all night instead of basically turning off the way photovoltaic panels do. These are the two halves of a single wind turbine blade. These things have gotten absolutely enormous. This one is about 100 meters long. And this is in a factory that is churning out these things. And they will be mated and they will be carried to a hilltop. Here's one being carried to the top of a hill in Hunan province and assembled. And these things can be, more than 200 meters tall, produce 10 megawatts of power, which is a lot of power. And China installed about 10,000 of them last year. China now has wind and solar capacity that is equal to the entire generating capacity of the US. That's in wind and solar alone. So yeah, the scale is amazing. And they've also invested in technologies that use the clean power. So these are electric trains. Everybody's heard of China's incredible high-speed train network. It's more than 30,000 miles of track now, and the trains are very, very fast. You can go from Beijing to Shanghai, which is 750 miles, in about 4 hours. Which kind of puts our Northeast Corridor trains to shame. And they're exporting these technologies. This is an aerial view of a port near Shanghai. These are cars. Many of them are electric cars. China makes 12 million electric cars a year and exports 1.5 million of them. That's more than Tesla makes, I think. We don't see those cars here because there are enormous tariffs keeping them out. And also there are huge tariffs against the solar panels. Now, this all looks like a happy story. There are a lot of dark sides to it. There are unfair trade practices. Many of the wind farms and solar panels are in places like Tibet and the Uyghur territory. And, it's hard to imagine that this has been good, all good for the ethnic minorities there. But it is really impressive and it's changing the world. So I couldn't talk about all the great news in science this year without talking about a darker story in the US, the Trump administration's really assault on science, which has had many components. Many research programs have been just ended because they had to do with DEI or even just human diversity, because they were focused on climate, because they were focused on vaccines. Federal scientists have been fired or forced out. The staff of the NIH, I think the latest numbers show it's down by about 20%. Now, that's not all scientists. That's a lot of support staff. But still, it's a big loss. We've all read about the upending of public health advice, especially in vaccines, through the CDC and FDA under Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And the Trump administration wants really big budget cuts to research. They're proposing something like more than a 50% cut to the National Science Foundation. Congress is resisting those cuts, but it isn't clear that the administration won't find other ways to keep the money from flowing. So it's not a pretty story, but Science is robust still in this country and elsewhere. And, the basic reasons people do it, curiosity and the desire to create a better world are still operating. And I am sure we will have lots of wonderful things to write about next year. And that picture, it's kind of it's kind of cheerful, but it's weird. It is a lake in Tibet, a salt lake that is a huge source of lithium. It yields lithium for hundreds of thousands of electric cars every year. And it's also a tourist attraction. Um, People go to look at the emerald waters and walk on the white dunes of salt. Um, so I'll leave you with that and happy to answer any questions. And thanks for listening.
Thanks, Tim. That was just a great talk. Um, Let me just say one thing about the breakthrough of the year itself. Um, as you know, Paul Krugman, the Nobel Prize-winning economist and writer, has been hammering the point that the United States has basically ceded advances in renewable energy to China. And I would just say that those pictures that you showed, amazing, amazing pictures, really make that point very clearly.
Yeah.
And I would add, if those of you who don't get science every week, you can go to the science website. They allow news stories, a certain number a month, to be publicly shown free of charge. And go look at the 18th of December issue, and you'll be amazed at these photos that George Steinmetz took of these. A few of them are shown. They're just spectacular photos.
Yeah, there are many more on the website. So please encourage you to take a look.
So we got a few questions that have come in from the audience. The first one is a kind of a process question. How do you choose the top 10 breakthroughs of the year? And do you consider societal criteria as part of the choice?
So our method isn't much of a method. We have a lot of people on staff who are, deep into their areas of science, both the reporters and the technical editors who handle the scientific papers, and they know what's happened over the past year and have strong opinions about what is most important. And many of the things on the list there isn't much dispute about. We do a fair amount of wrangling about some of them. And yes, we do consider societal importance. And in fact, this year's breakthrough is really that. It is not a technological breakthrough. These solar panels and wind turbines and so on they're old technologies that have been refined and refined. The solar cells were invented in the US in the 1950s. The US made most of the world's solar cells, I imagine, and through the 70s, we used them for spacecraft and things like that. But China has perfected the manufacturing of them, and they've become more efficient and way, way, way cheaper over the years.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Question about wave energy. Will this eventually become part of the renewable mix?
I don't know. I just know that in the many years I've been covering science, people have always talked about wave energy, and there are always a few installations out there, often experimental, maybe a few that have actually been brought online, but it's never seemed to grow. I think it's a difficult engineering challenge, and there are not that many good places to set up wave energy plants. That's my guess.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Tim. I think it's hard to argue against the simplicity of a solar cell with two wires coming out of it.
Yeah.
And the windmill technology has been perfected over the last 40 or 50 years. And the study on waves have been too localized. And you're part of the problem with the wind towers in the sea is the corrosion. So you're dealing with a corrosive environment. So it's a matter of scale. We now have, because of China efforts, the solar and the wind technology has been produced at scale and can be exported at scale.
Yeah. A question about China and coal. Are they still building coal plants in China? I'm pretty sure they are.
They are, yes. And some of the people I talked to, I wrote the breakthrough essay, and some of the people said, we're disturbed that they're still producing coal, still building coal plants. They're doing it as insurance. Many of these plants are not being used or not being used at full capacity. They're there to serve as, what are called peaker plants. So if there should be a shortfall in renewable energy, they can turn on the coal plants and make up for it. But they are not being used at full capacity.
Yeah. And I might say that there was a report that came out, I believe, yesterday, showing that the United States has increased its use of coal for power generation over the past 2 years quite considerably.
Yeah, yeah, which makes us really an outlier among developed countries.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, well, we are at our time limit, but we have a few more questions coming in. This is a fairly complicated one, but I'll try and make it understandable. The news item on cancer and mitochondrial transference sounds similar to positive research being performed by Dr. Yong Zhao from Throne Technologies in New Jersey that transfers mitochondrial packets from cord cells into human T cells and white blood cells. It appears to have cured an instance of type 1 diabetes, improved a patient with ALS, and seems to be a cure for alopecia. Any comment on that?
Well, I think that, I'm not familiar with that research, but I know there is a lot of interest in revitalizing mitochondria as a way of treating all kinds of diseases, including and slowing aging. Because after all, these are the things that give cells their vitality. Um, the cancer example is how that can have a bad effect. But there are lots of people interested in harnessing mitochondria for positive benefits.
Colin and Tim, maybe we should end on this very positive question that Dave B. put in front of us. It was reported that congressional budgets for science actually grew slightly. True? Well, yes. And that the House of Representatives is presently working on a budget for the next fiscal year. And they have ignored the Trump budget requests of significantly cutting science, National Institutes of Health, National Science Foundation, and have basically held them flat. And flat is a lot better than 40% cuts. It's just the House Science Committee. It has to go to the full House, and then it has to go to the Senate. But it's certainly a very positive sign. It means that Congress has traditionally treated science in a very positive, bipartisan way. And that appears to have survived the first year of Trump.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, that is encouraging for sure.
Yeah, good way to end it, Fred. Thanks.
Yeah.
So thank you, Tim. That was just a wonderful presentation. There have been several comments coming in saying what a great presentation it was. So let me turn it back to Rebecca, and again, thanks, and we'll see you next year, Tim.
Yeah. I'll have plenty more to talk about, and thank you all. I enjoyed doing it.
All right, everyone. If, as is our custom, if you would like to unmute yourself and applaud and say thank you, feel free to do so. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Really good.
Nice job, Tim.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Great. Thank you. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. And we hope to see you next month on February 3rd for the next Science and Society lecture. So we will see you then. Thanks. Bye-bye.